All right, a little inhaler there to kick us off. Welcome, everybody, to today's Saros Educate webinar, How to Write for Your Digital Audience. In this session, we'll be sharing some best practices and tips for how to effectively write and design digital content so that it can better connect with your audience. And I feel like the timing of this webinar is just so perfect with tomorrow being Valentine's Day, because we're going to talk a lot about how to be emotionally resonant and really putting yourself in your audience's shoes as you're creating your content. So I've been looking forward to this one. I hope you all have some good takeaways from this session. And my name is Travis. I will be your host for today. I am the digital content educator on the Saros Educate team. And I like to think I have an interesting perspective on this topic of writing and designing, for that matter, digital content, because I work with many clients here at Saros, many of you in this audience today, working through strategizing, brainstorming, and implementing effective design as it relates to your copy, and also making that impactful with interactivity and amazing visuals. But also, I do a fair share of writing with our knowledge base, which is also called Educate, if you weren't aware. So I write a lot of the articles that you read on there, and we're going to be talking about how to have more impact with less, and also, the objective of conciseness and how that plays a role into how your audience is going to retain and stick with the content that you are presenting to them. So all of those things and factors combined, I think, set me up in a good spot to be sharing these best practices with you all today. As we go through our journey, we are going to examine, like I said, some best practices on how to effectively write and design for your audiences. We're also going to kind of put ourselves in our audience's shoes and get inside the average web user's brain and kind of analyze habits and patterns that are kind of commonly utilized across, the entire web. And then from there, after we've gone through some best practices and empathizing with our audience, we'll then kind of pull it all together and give you kind of a step-by-step plan on how to begin a project and effectively achieve your goals with your design. As we go through the session today, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat or the Q&A box, and we will have some time at the end of our presentation to go over anything that we missed or just need more clarity on. But let's get started, shall we? So everyone here is well aware that content, it's everywhere these days to an overwhelming amount, it seems at times. It's in your emails, it's in your feeds, it's in your ads, it's in quite literally everything that we consume on a daily basis. And that is kind of taxing as the average consumer. It lessens our attention spans and our ability to consume, because we're consuming content at such an insane volume that we just kind of tend to not take as much time with content these days. It really has to grab us from the onset for us to care. So because of that, capturing your audience with your content and thus writing and designing that content becomes even more of a challenge, because the reality is your audience, your viewers, when you present your content to them, whether it's an infographic, a landing page, whatever it is, you have a split second, or actually 50 milliseconds, according to the Nielsen Norman Group, to have your user, your viewer, form an opinion of your content. And that is obviously an insanely tiny window. So you do not have much time to make the right impression on your users. So because of that, you need to use that time wisely to make sure you are reaching the right people and sending the right message to capture your audience. And I think the first part, zooming back a little bit before you actually get to writing the copy, making the design, is to firmly align with your team or whoever else you're collaborating on with this piece on, to set goals and identify your audience. So before we get to the what, or the how, I should say, we need to analyze the what it is that we're trying to sell folks on, to get folks to support us with. Who are these people and how do we connect with them? So the first part of that is setting a goal for your piece. Every experience, really any piece of content that you create, should have a clearly defined goal. And every choice that you make in your design should serve that goal. And to determine your goal, ask yourself these questions. One, what action do I want the user to take at the end of this experience? Is it giving me their data through a form? Is it just spreading awareness about my brand and my mission? Is it click-throughs? Is it signups? Am I getting RSVPs for an event? What is the action that I want my viewer to take at the end of this piece? And then identify what is the larger purpose of this experience. If we're talking something like an event page, is it to get folks out to that event? Quite obviously in that scenario, but what is the larger purpose of this particular experience, and what does it do to serve the goal of that larger purpose? And then zooming out even farther, how will this experience help my business long term? How will this event page lead to more, folks coming out to the event? How will that event and the attendance to that impact my business strategy moving forward? There's a lot of things to figure out when you're developing content before you even start typing or designing anything. And not only that, along with goal setting, you have to put yourself in your audience's shoes and figure out who your target audience is and how you can connect with them. So whether you're asking your users to give you their money, their data, or just simply their time, you are demanding something of them. And what needs to happen to make them want to help you? So at this point, I would like to turn it over to all of you and take a look at these three questions that I have here. And in the chat, I would love to hear from some of you. What kind of content connects with you? What makes you, our audience members, stick around through reading a whole, blog or consuming TikToks for hours upon hours? What type of content connects with you, and why does it connect with you? Those are some questions to ask yourself. Maisie goes, video, humor. Yeah, absolutely. I think injecting levity and lightheartedness into content can really make it feel less mundane and also more human. Jennifer says, compelling images. Absolutely. The visuals can do a lot. Melissa says, here we go, an emotional connection. Yes, Diane says emotional as well. Yeah, these are all great. And these are all kind of universally applicable to all of us, right? There are times where we have consumed something because of it resonating with us on an emotional basis, or because we saw an amazing visual, or a little bite or a statistic that we're like, wow, that's really cool. I didn't know about that. I want to learn more about this. These are all fantastic answers, but I think these are important questions to ask yourself as the content creator when you go into brainstorming and conceptualizing your content, whatever it is to, again, put yourself in your audience's position, kind of flip the mirror around and self-analyze and be like, would this land with me? Would this land with my team? And if the answer is no to both of those questions, you should probably reassess your approach, if I'm being honest. Awesome. Now, I would like to take a look at some patterns that web users tend to follow with how they read and consume content. And the biggest one, and I'm guilty of this too, I think a lot of us are, is they scan. 16% of users read web-based content word for word, but 79% of them scan the content. So we're talking looking at headlines, maybe a visual, and maybe that's all they get through. And again, I think that's becoming more and more commonplace just because of the bombardment of all the volume of content that we get on a daily basis. We don't have time to read through dozens upon dozens of blogs or anything else, even if it's interactive. So because of that, readers value easy reading. So text that is concise, scannable, and objective often gets a lot more reader engagement. In fact, according to the Nielsen Norman Group, it's 124% more reader engagement. And this next activity that we have here, we are going to take a look at basically the same information, the same statistics. This is about 1996 most visited attractions in Nebraska. But I want you to analyze the way that this text is formatted and see how it lands with you. I think immediately, if I'm reading this text, I'll get to about maybe here, and I'm very hesitant to continue on just because this is so dense. There's a lot of numbers here. It's not broken up. It's all just one wall of text. It's not very appealing, right? So then compare that to the second example here, which is it's just like a a breath of fresh air. There are bullet points, the text is broken up, but it's the same information, just more concise and objective. Like this is just so much better. So I would say when you start recognizing, putting yourself in your audience's shoes already from the onset before you start actually writing that stuff, recognize that you're not going to probably have the 28-page PDF word for word in your design. You're going to have to make some concessions and be as concise and brief as possible. Otherwise, folks will likely not consume your piece beyond maybe just the headline. And it should come as no surprise to anyone here. Folks like interactions. 79% of users agree that interactive content helps them retain information better. And I think this also extends to a lot of the work that I do with my team, with our educational learning experiences, specifically things like the Studio 101 workbook, giving folks an opportunity to interact with and engage with the learning process so that you're not just talking at them the entire time. There's a little bit of participation involved, and you can actually utilize interactivity and functions within that design or whatever it is to better familiarize your audience and also endear them to it and likely have them more engaged. And also, folks dig visuals. A lot of people do in this chat. Content with visuals get 94% more views according to Forbes. So we'll see this point come up again later on in this presentation. But as you're figuring out how much copy to include, also take into account that you're going to need some visuals to supplement that, or let your visuals do the talking. Because oftentimes folks connect with a visual, whether that's a video, a GIF, or an animated piece, more than just reading something. It's a lot easier to visualize something if we can actually see it versus just reading about it. And then finally, let's be honest, we don't scroll that far, do we, gang? 75% of viewing time is spent in the first two screenfuls of content. So that's roughly up to 2160 pixels. And if we're thinking about that in terms of a Saros experience design, if we're thinking about like the default height on an experience, that is roughly maybe 3 sections of an experience. That's not a ton, guys. So really, it's important to get all of your most critical information and the most attention grabbing stuff in that first screenful. Because if it's not there and you're putting it further down the page, folks might never get to it. Okay. So now how does all of that, how do those behaviors and patterns and recognizing, these behaviors of our audience, how does that all translate to writing for interactive? Well, for one, it's great to invest in headlines. This might be the only thing, and it's obviously the first thing that your users will read. So give it some serious thought. I mean, when we think about really effective marketing collateral that we've seen, or when you open up a newspaper, I don't know how many of you read newspapers anymore, but if you read a headline that's really shocking or bold, chances are you might be more intrigued and invested in reading the rest of that piece. But if there's nothing there that immediately grabs your attention from that first headline, you might not even go past that. And also, as I've kind of briefly already touched on, write less. When it comes to word count, less is more. The more concise and impactful you can be with fewer characters will go a long way in the retention of your audience. And also, when it comes to the formatting, break up your copy like I did here. Make it easy for your users to get the info they came for. And I'd love to show you an example now of an article that we have on Educate that kind of illustrates the formatting that I would personally strive to go for if you've got a lot of information that you need to present to your viewers. So like this asset library overview article, if you have maybe a hero section that needs kind of like a mission statement or an about statement, I would keep it no longer than a paragraph or two. I think this is kind of the ideal length just to kind of set your viewer up to understand what they're going to be consuming with the rest of this piece. And then from there, be as brief and concise as possible. Make it very scannable for your viewers. And we really have been striving as a team to make, headlines and headers that are very, very quick to scan through so that a user can find specifically, maybe they're only interested for this article on how to save assets to the asset library. It's big and bold right here, and then they can read the information along with some visuals and be on their way, even if they don't need to consume this whole piece. So again, being brief is so important. It will help with retention. Less is more. And then let your visuals do the work. Utilize those graphs, those illustrations and animations, because those can convey a lot of meaning. Like I said before, oftentimes more meaning and have more resonance than just someone reading text. If they can see it visually on the page, what it is you're describing, they can connect with it more and it might engage with them more than just, like I said, reading about it. And finally, get creative. Unique experiences are memorable experiences. And I would encourage you all to try some nonlinear approaches to telling your story and creating your content. So, what do I mean by that? Well, I think oftentimes when we see things like maybe a case study page, we can see folks fall into the trap of just kind of going, how they started, where they began with their organization, with the service, whatever it is, and kind of taking the viewers through like from start to finish. But that means that the real important stuff that any prospects could potentially get out of that piece are sometimes sandwiched near the bottom of the experience. So any testimonials, any kind of proof of value for that service or product is kind of tucked away further down the page so that it's kind of harder to find. And I would say putting that stuff up front, kind of starting with the end before you go back to the beginning, could be a great way to capture your audience. Like the why. Why do I care about this? Like it's great that you guys started from a hole in the wall 10 by 10 office and got to where you are now, but how does that really impact me as a potential prospect and consumer of the service or good that you're selling to me right now? So I think the more that you can entice folks up front, even if that means that you're starting with the why up front rather than the how and the entire story, that can be more effective than taking a linear approach to your writing and how your content is laid out in your design. Okay, so now that we've put ourselves in our audience's shoes, we understand better their reading patterns and having empathy for folks because we are consumers of content ourselves. Now we can kind of put it all together and walk you through a step-by-step process of how to go about creating a design and writing for your content. And like we said before, step one should always be determine the goal. It is not enough to have a goal in mind. So write it out. Now write it out with the feeling your audience needs to have for your goal to succeed. Again, we're talking about emotional resonance, things that will connect with your audience. Like I think there will be different approaches to this depending on what your service or goods are. Like for example, if you're trying to pitch a daycare service, you're probably going to want to have really friendly and welcoming language and visuals to assure any parents or guardians that, yeah, this is a good group of individuals to leave my child with for the day versus maybe a workspace task management platform like ClickUp, where it's like kind of presenting yourself as the solution to a problem that teams might be having with efficiency and not being able to track metrics and projects. So again, this approach and this goal and who your audience is going to change depending on what the product is, what the service is, and also what the objective is for that content. But again, determining the goal is always where you should start in your content creation process. And then from there, determine the story of this piece. And you are better off not trying to include everything in your experience. Again, less is more. In Intro to Design, one of our guided design courses here on Educate, we really drive home the point of utilizing your negative space, not over cluttering the design, not bombarding people with things coming in from all sides of the screen. It's disorienting and it can immediately tune folks out of that piece. So have it be very focused, concise, and be more impactful with less. So instead, pick out your best storyline. And there are a few keys to finding a good story that I would like to share with you. starting with juicy data. And this kind of goes back to the case study analogy I made earlier. What statistics make your eyes widen the most? Your users will probably feel the same way. If it's something that you and your team are really proud about and feel like it's something you should wear as a badge of honor and that it could potentially sway someone to your cause, share that stuff. People will probably latch onto it. And also, similar to the analogy I just made with ClickUp, identify a problem that you can be the answer to with your content and with your services, with your product. Is there a shocking problem your users didn't know impact them, or an easily relatable problem that has a solution they didn't know existed? Present one to them. Maybe there are folks that you're trying to engage with that didn't know they had an efficiency problem or a tracking problem. But by highlighting those things and getting folks to kind of think about the larger picture of how your service or goods fit into their business practices, maybe you can clear up some things that they weren't even aware of until they interacted with your piece of content. That's a beautiful thing. And also, it's having emotional resonance. That is probably arguably the most critical component to finding a good story and how you frame it, as we've kind of talked about in the earlier part of this webinar. And as many of you relayed in the chat today, something that endears you, something that resonates with you and pulls at your heartstrings. This makes your content more relatable and also more engaging, and will entice folks to keep reading rather than just generic language that's cold and can be more widely applicable. Be more focused, be more targeted. Again, this all goes back to the goal setting. You are setting a goal to target a specific set of users and viewers, so you need to find ways to connect with those folks that isn't so generalized. So be emotionally resonant with your approach to your storytelling. Awesome. And then once you've got your goals set up, you've kind of figured out how you want to present this content, then brainstorm a concept for the execution of that story. So figure out what storytelling style will highlight your main point. So is this a case study? Is this a landing page? Is this an infographic? And I would say, as archaic as it might sound, get a pen and paper and sketch out some visual elements to really visualize how this might look on the screen. And here are a few examples to get you started. So these are all some concepts that you could potentially work your story into, starting with a comparison chart. This is a great way to show the difference between two concepts or opposing views on the same thing. We've all seen marketing where, there's like, 55% more, effective than this other brand, or you've seen it before, but stuff like that, where it's just like comparing us to them, maybe not so directly with your competitors, but just like proving that you are the solution in this market, in this industry, and making comparisons to the other parties or the other competitors in your industry. And this isn't quite that, but this is still a really fun example of comparing two different concepts. And this is also appropriately timed because it's a Patriots experience. Why you love or hate the Patriots in 5 charts. So it's a bit of a data viz infographic and also just a fun visual piece. Given that the Super Bowl was just this past weekend, it's like this stuff was just meant to be today. But I want you all to take note of the way they utilize the visual elements, the layout, the specific design components, and the colors between these two tabs, and just how much the feeling of that piece changes between the love and hate toggles. So when we look at the love toggle right here, it's very bright colors. The Patriots colors are in full view. You've got the turf, bright green, right? This looks like a fan piece. It's like a love letter to the Patriots. It's sharing the story of why someone would love the Patriots, and also backs it up with a lot of information and statistics on why they were awesome when Tom Brady was working with them. And then compare that to the hate toggle. Now it looks like the Joker had a pass at it and just started graffitiing out everything. And immediately the color shifts, right? Everything is now in monochrome and has, red lettering over it, and is just kind of, it's a very angry vibe now, right? It's incredible, but the tone completely shifts. So all this to say, a comparison chart can really kind of convey emotions from two different perspectives. It is really dark, Liana. So, but yeah, a comparison piece can really, again, kind of emphasize different perspectives that folks might have on, the state of your industry, whatever it is that you are trying to get them on board with. It can really share different perspectives and get folks to look at stuff from various different viewpoints. But I love the use of color here and these toggles because it really changes the mood of this piece from the love to hate side. Just such a huge difference. I mean, most of the content is still the same, like the text and everything, but just that quick color and and adding more visual elements to make it look like someone took graffiti to all this stuff just really makes a huge difference. Awesome. Another great example is location. So if you want to tell the story of a place and highlight its features, you can get a lot of information through an interactive map. And because folks love interactions, it gives users incentive to stay on the page and have it be more enjoyable. So we've got an experience here from Pop Chips. I love this one. It's so colorful and just makes me want to take a trip. But this is a street food worth traveling for experience. So you've got all these different pins here in the UK. So you can click on maybe like Glasgow and see all the local eats. There's some accordions here as well. This is such a fun experience. And it's also not one that you have to really scroll through. It's all done in one viewport. So it's very consumable. It's very fun and animated. And there's a lot of interactivity to allow folks to go through this at their own pace. Like maybe they're taking a trip to Birmingham next month. They only care about knowing the local cuisine from Birmingham. They can take the option to just consume that piece within the experience and maybe not engage with the rest of it. Or if they find that enjoyable, maybe they'll be like, hey, now I'm kind of curious about the rest of these eats locally. Let's check these out. So you're by giving folks more interactive opportunities, you're putting them in the driver's seat and allowing them to digest this content. Pop Chips are great. You're allowing your viewers to navigate the content at their own pace, right? Which is more enticing for them rather than just forcing you through a linear structure like we talked about earlier. This is kind of the unconventional approach to storytelling that I was talking about, giving folks multiple opportunities and pathways to consuming this content that isn't so top to bottom structured. Also, a great way to tell your story is to have a product demo, show off what you're demoing. If it's something that you can embed in a design and get users to interact with, awesome. Folks love demos. I love demos as a gamer. It makes me sometimes it can sometimes sway me if I want to pick up a game. If I check out a demo, I'm like, yeah, that was pretty good. I'll spend 60 to 70 bucks on that. But yeah, the more that you can, more opportunities that you can give your audience to interact with your product, with your services, the better. Also, as this kind of goes hand in hand with the comparisons, but having different perspectives in your storytelling is great as well. So that we kind of frame this as like a choose your own adventure thing. So maybe having multiple different testimonials, maybe having like a quiz experience or like a personality test within your experience to kind of figure out what is going to land more with some audience members versus others. That can be another great approach. I don't have a product concept one, Terry, but if you're thinking about it in like Saros experiences stuff, you could potentially use the embed object tool in Studio to embed something, a demo of your piece. You could also potentially link out to a site, where you have your product on where they can sign up for a demo. That's another way. It doesn't have to technically live in the piece, but as long as you have awareness or are able to connect your prospects with the product easier, that's a great way to go about it as well. Yeah, absolutely, Terry. And then finally, we have a timeline approach to telling your story. So this is a great way to show how things have evolved over time, how your business has grown, how you've taken different approaches to being the problem solvers in your industry, or just a way to have fun, like we see here with this experience from Gum Gum on the history of viral imagery, the what makes an image go viral. And this is a fun experience because it's both informative, but also kind of tongue in cheek and lighthearted. You'll see as I click through this timeline that a lot of the pictures have been doctored. Truman right there. It's fun, right? But it's a great way to show how something has changed over time. It's again another. It could be a linear approach, but it could also be a non-linear approach to storytelling because you're allowing this piece allows the viewer to consume it linearly through these left and right arrows. Pharaoh with the aviators right here, or they can just click on a specific year. So again, giving more interactivity to your audience. And maybe initially they were only curious about how viral photography was in the 80s, but then after going through and seeing that first tab that they engage with, they're like, oh, this is fun. I'm gonna stick with it a little bit longer and go through the rest of it. So again, talking about that non-linear approach to storytelling while also having some semblance of linearity can work hand in hand, depending on the context of your piece. Awesome. And then step 4 to creating your awesome content is to write a headline. We cannot stress this enough. Your headline should not be an afterthought. It is the first thing, and again, maybe only thing your readers will see, and it will inform them if they should continue reading. So make it punching, make it grabbing, make it relevant. And if you're not sure where to start, I would suggest digging out the most interesting part from your copy, your statistics, whatever that is, and frame your experience, your design, your copy around that one nugget for your headline. That should be the attention grabbing piece. And then once you've figured out your goal, your audience, how you want to frame the story, you've got a catchy headline, then it comes time to start fleshing out the rest of the content, starting with an outline. So the next step in this process is to organize your content, putting the most important stuff up at the top, again, because we might only get a screenful or two of engagement, and then the least important stuff at the bottom, or consider cutting it out altogether. The less fluff and padding you can have in a piece, the better. Keep the critical components in there and figure out with your team and align on, do we need all this stuff? I actually worked with a user not too long ago that had one of those 28-page PDFs I alluded to earlier, where it was just a ton of copy. But we were able to set that up in an experience to where it was a lot more digestible and consumable and engaging with tile systems, with pop-ups, with carousels, so that the viewer could consume it at their own pace by not being overwhelmed from just this infinite death scroll of content. And we call this process the building the hierarchy of content. So your header section, hero section, but also kind of the importance of that content and figuring out, well, okay, if I've got a hero section, should I have my important facts right there? Should I have a testimonial right there? Should I have a proof of value right there to really hook people along with my headline? All things to consider. And also, don't forget to break up your content into easily digestible chunks. Try to avoid copy that is any longer than a paragraph or two. And then actually write that copy. And if your outline is really good, there might not be much more to do here. If it's a really fleshed out concept and outline, and it's more of a visual piece that doesn't have a lot of copy, you might not need to do a lot of work with this step. But write your copy in a way that will appeal to your users. Again, having that emotional resonance, connecting with them in some way, and try again to be sparing. I feel like I'm just hitting this over the head, but be sparing, be concise. The visuals and the animations of your interactive content should do most of the lifting, because that's what people are going to remember the most. And then once you've got it assembled, once you've got it all built out, get into the headspace of your users and go through your copy, go through your design, and be honest. Do you daze out halfway through a carousel or just brush over your headline? Chances are, if your attention wanders, your audiences will likely wander as well. This is oftentimes the hardest thing to do, because I think as creators, we like to be very safeguarding of our content and like to think of it as this precious, perfect thing oftentimes. And we're really proud of it and think everyone should love it and consume it. But that's just not the reality. We have to be more objective and look at it from a more, objective lens and kind of remove our personal aspect out of it. And just kind of be more, look at it from, if you were in your audience's perspective, would this land with you? It's really hard to do. But I think you can do it with enough time and patience. And then finally, brainstorm design ideas. This is kind of what I like to call the bells and whistles phase. So once you've got the mission lined out, the copy, the outline, everything good to go, then figure out ways to enhance it with cool design components or animations and discuss these with your team so that these elements can have even more oomph and impact in landing with your audience. So hopefully by following these steps, you will have infinitely more impactful and resonant content with your audience. So I hope through this process today of putting ourselves in our viewers' shoes, you have learned more about how to write more empathetically and be more resonant with the content that you create, whether it's interactive or static. But I would love to take this opportunity now that we've gone through this whole journey together to turn it back over to our audience and see if we have any questions about what we just discussed. I know I laid a lot on you, but do we have any questions or curiosities about what this process looks like? Jeffrey goes, can I get a private tutor about this? Well, Jeffrey, if you would like, I would invite you to come out to our Educate office hours on our Educate site. We are happy to brainstorm copy designs with you, whenever you would like on Mondays or Mondays at, is it 3 p.m.? I think it's 3 p.m. on Mondays, and Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern time. These sessions are open to anyone, mind you, who's attending this call. So thank you, Liana. Yeah, 3 p.m. on Monday, 11 a.m. on Thursday. So anything that you guys want to work out with your design, with effectively staging that content. Actually, just that session I was talking about where we took that 28-page PDF, that was in an office hour session. We strategized on how to lay it out, and then we made it happen. So yeah, absolutely, we can get together and brainstorm how to most effectively tackle your content creation. Patricia has a question. Can you talk a bit about SEO considerations? Ooh, I think for this, I would also make sure that the content that you want to be crawlable and most accessible to search engines is the stuff in your keywords, in your headlines, in your title, so that it's more easily accessible. Thank you, Liana, for sharing that. We do have an entire SEO checklist that I would invite you to check out, Patricia, that kind of goes more into the deeper implications of SEO with Saros. But I would start there, figure out your keywords, make sure your copy and anything that you have throughout the design aligns with those keywords so that they're easily searchable, and then kind of work your way from there. I mean, it's going to often depend on how elaborate the piece is. Like a landing page is going to take a different approach to designing with SEO in mind than something that's just like a piece of micro content that's just like a data viz, right? So it's very touch and go, but I think if you check out those resources that Liana just sent in the chat, thank you again, Liana, you'll have a better understanding of how you can implement SEO effectively for your Saros designs. Mandy goes, great presentation. Do you have any tips for best practices about creating content that will translate and load well across devices? Ooh, that is a fantastic question. Well, typically when I make a design that I know is going to have a mobile layout, I typically try to create components that are easily adapted, if that makes sense. So stuff that can be adjusted with the copy or the frames so that I'm not doing a ton of like back and forth tedious work between my layouts. I think sometimes the approach you take for a mobile viewer could be different than a desktop viewer. I think you have more obviously screen real estate to work with on a desktop design, so you can go a little bit further with animations and the fun bells and whistles like I was talking about earlier. But I think for mobile, try to be more streamlined. I mean, the reality is most folks are going to consume content on their phones these days. So trying to be even more brief when designing for mobile, even more concise, even more impactful in those couple first screenfuls, because we love to scroll through stuff very quickly on mobile. So being more conscious of that and maybe not including all of the interactivity that you had on desktop on mobile, and then kind of figure out what's most critical to have in adapting that for mobile, and then go from there. Maybe it's too much, maybe it's not enough, but I would start with isolating those things and keeping in mind that a viewer is going to probably need even more conciseness to stick with and consume your content when viewing it on a mobile device. Jeffrey's got another question. Can this be helpful for people who have high functioning autism, ADHD, etc.? And do you have an education strategy to help those who are neurodivergent? So easily understand what you're teaching. Could you elaborate more on that, Jeffrey? I apologize for not having a great answer to this. Again, if this is something that you would like to discuss with us in an office hour or set up with your account manager to do a one-on-one training so we could really walk through the specifics of the strategy and the issues and the problems that you're facing, I would love to explore that further. I don't feel like I'm most well equipped to answer that in totality here. Molly's got something here. I'll bet using some of our accessibility features using focus trapping could help. Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have a lot of native tools in the platform, things like Molly said, like the focus lock feature, hiding from screen readers so that there's not multiples of text layers and buttons being read out. There's a lot of resources that you can consume for accessible content on our Educate site. We actually have a whole accessibility workbook that we created with our accessibility advisor here at Saros, Christina. So I would invite you to check those resources out, Jeffrey. And if there's a conversation that you would like to have about a specific problem that you would like to strategize on, you're welcome to reach out to my team, or we could get you in contact with our accessibility advisor if it's something more like accessibility oriented that we can walk you through. Awesome. Christian's got a question. What is the best approach for setting up a sitemap and taxonomy for a specific business within a large global B2B industrial organization website? Whew, I guess it depends on how big of a site we're talking. I would typically say with experiences, I think if it's something that is going to require dozens of pages, I'm not sure that is the best use case for a Saros experience. So if the intent is to create a sitemap in Saros, I'm not sure that's the best use case for the platform, if I'm being truthful. But that said, you can certainly do a lot with navigation between multiple pages or sections of content in Studio. You could create things like synced objects for navigation to where if you update it on one page, it'll update it across multiple pages, and you can have linking interactions in those groups for taking you to external URLs or different pages in a multi-page experience. But I guess it would really depend on how much content, how big the sitemap you're considering is. It's very contextual. Laura's got a question. What are your thoughts on ways to improve content for accessibility inclusivity? Would you suggest any resources? Laura, I think we just kind of talked about there a little bit with our existing resources on Educate. I would check those out. I would definitely go through the accessibility workbook. I think that's going to be fantastic. Alex, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate you. Amanda's got a question. I'm working with a team to develop a monthly member benefits email for an association. So I'm considering these tips through that lens. Is it possible to integrate Saros elements into e-newsletters through Salesforce Marketing Cloud? Any examples or tips you can share for this use case? Ooh, I have not had any experience myself with integrating Saros experience into Salesforce. I believe others at the organization have. That's certainly something you could probably get in contact, Amanda, with your account manager here to walk through. I do know that if we're talking strictly emails right now, you cannot embed Saros experiences in emails. You can certainly link out to them with published links. A lot of folks will have, maybe if they're sending email comms about a piece that they designed in Studio, they'll have like a fun GIF that they created in Giphy Capture and the link to their standalone site, and they'll kind of share it that way. So yeah, there's definitely some approaches you can take to sending your content that you create in Saros through email campaigns. But I don't know a lot about Salesforce, where I can definitively answer that at this time. I would love for Amanda or anyone else that has a more technical question to share these with us on our product questions section on Educate. That way we can look into it with the appropriate parties and get back to you. We don't want to leave anyone hanging that didn't get a conclusive answer here on our webinar today. Jeffrey, if you want to reach out to your customer success manager, I would find out who that individual is from whomever, works with your team comms wise and us, and email that individual, and they'll be able to set up a training with our team. Fantastic. We'll take one more question here from Rachel. What would your advice be for making dry subjects like B2B corporate, performance management, more engaging, emotional without overdoing it? Ooh, that is the question, isn't it? I think a lot of it can just come down to the interactivity. I don't think you have to really ham it up. I don't think you have to include kind of forced levity or forced emotion. I think letting the facts speak for themselves, but giving them more of an interactive component. Maybe you've got a lot of team tiles or testimonials that you want to set up in the experience, making those things more clickable and interactive and visually compelling with their design implementations, along with animations, can go a long way to making things not feel so drab. But yeah, I would start there. Is making things more interactive. Do I set this up as a tab module so that it's more easily consumable and a little bit more enjoyable and digestible for my viewers to engage with? And then figure out, like we were talking about with the bells and whistles thing, if there's anything else that you feel is appropriate to include within the context of that piece, any visuals, any animations, to see if you can enhance the engagement factor with that piece. But I would start with interactivity. That's kind of half the point of what we were talking about today, is marrying interactivity with good copy. Awesome. Well, we'll call it there again. Thank you all so much for your questions. Again, if there was a question that I couldn't answer definitively on this call, I would invite you to ask us that question in product questions or design help on Educate. That is in the discussion section right here. There's a place for both of those topics. And if there's something that we can't immediately answer, we will find out that information and get back to you. But thank you all so much for joining How to Write for Your Digital Audience today. We hope that you were able to get some good takeaways and nuggets from this presentation from all of us here on the Saros Educate team. We so greatly appreciate your viewership, and we hope to see you soon. Take care, everybody.